Hey, beautiful fall day today. Autumn in New England. I don't know if there's anything more beautiful, and I've probably said that before, but I just went outside for a few minutes, and it just was the first time it really just was fall. Even though we're still a couple days short of that, I guess, technically, or whatever. All right, so I want to thank, before we start any further, Benjamin C. and Jimmy C. Jimmy, that is thanks to you. This is how many have you done in the last very short period of time? Really appreciate these donations, and please be around if I can be of use to you. I know you're from the area. All right, let's get on with a very interesting couple questions. One's been hanging around a while. By the way, if my nose is running, it's because it's so cold. We don't have any heat in the house yet, and the studio's here. So I'll try to not to be too impolite. Speaking of riddles, I for years wondered what Degas meant when he said, "I'm a colorist with my line." And he also, by the way, said he tried to encourage other impressionists to get more, to consider that there might be more they could get out of line. And it sounded like he was acting as an impressionist. He referred to himself as an impressionist in line as well. Well, listen to this. Your comments about color in both the last live stream and in this discussion have made me think he's hinting at the fact that a painter using the full color spectrum as opposed to a monochrome treatment can't really separate color from drawing. If by drawing we mean spatial and form effects, nature doesn't present herself with a separation between color and drawing. It's only in our minds that these effects are separate. Maybe he means one can't fully bring the drawing without the color relationships from the start. Paul, do you have your own interpretation of what this quote means? I've never taken that quote to mean that, Ken. This is from Ken M. Out of Chicago, former student and a good friend. So, but that is the quote. That is the essence of what Hale says in the book on Vermeer, that he got his drawing so right by getting his color right or something like that. So, but I don't take that to be. I think Degas is on a slightly different track, and I'm going to try to maintain what you just discussed here, brought up, this I'm a colorist with my line, and then jump to another question by Saleh, and rSahle, if I have the right person attached to this quote. He says, can you make a video, she says, can you make a video that discusses if Ang would reject Degas' progression in art? I'm sorry, I put that in brackets, by the way. That means it's my words and I messed up his grammar. A video that discusses if Ang would reject Degas' progression in art would be highly interesting. There is some suspense in that topic too because of their relationship. That's a fun idea, the idea of suspense in our activities here. So I'm going to discuss both of these points. Would Ang find fault with what happened with Degas, what he became? I'm going to tell you straight up that he would not, but in fact would have said this is astonishingly in line. Degas is one of the guys who cares about the great lineage and values associated with painting. He's not an innovator in that sense. He does break shallow rules. He seems to cross the line a number of times, but when you think him through over time, you won't find that to be the case. He's just dedicated to the great unity that is art, that is painting, as Ang is. But here's Ang. Now let's go. Ken's question is has to do with Degas and line, a colorist in line. Well, what's a colorist? This is the most important thing you can possibly you say when you're thinking this through? We have the word color schemes, but Degas makes this comment. He says, what's more beautiful than two different colors, two different values of the same color side by side? Degas is totally into the relational, right? Degas is about what this does to that. And so it's the interplay. And he uses the word harmony as well. So if you think about this just for 2 seconds, you're going to find what we're talking about. For example, well, let me give you a quote here. I think I'll give you this quote first. If I could make you all musicians, you'd gain as painters. All is harmony in nature. A little too much, a little too little, strays the scale and makes a false note. One must succeed in singing with the pencil or the brush, as well as with the voice. The rightness of form is like the rightness of sound. Well, what is that? That's the tuning, right? That's the harmonizing, right? The getting the notes to flow together, both the timing, the type of note, the interplay of multiples. That's all we're talking about there. So we're looking at Ang here, and one of the things that my experience with Gamble gave me was he would talk about designing a drapery, and there would be this whole discussion about, and we would sit there and stare at it and think, what the heck does that even mean? Model sitting there, there's folds. But this idea of harmony, so if you're just talking about linear harmony, that's not a difficult proposition, is it? You're talking about, for example, even just the way the necklace plays, the lines, these lines play in themselves. Now, the form, the folds, the interplay, he's looking for how these things hang together and what they do to create this harmony, the underlying idea of which is discovered in nature. And you could say even the nature of the thing sitting in front of him. So this isn't Impressionism in the sense that there she sat down, she pulled the thing over and you copied it. Not even a good Impressionist will do that doing a portrait. The picture, as Gamble would say, your impression is going to be only as magical as what you have sitting in front of you. And if you're setting up a portrait, you have some obligations that way. But our research when we're doing drawing, for example, is to find the interplay of things and to find out how things hang together. And so there's a whole discussion about the whole and all those things. So, but if we just took this as color, that's in the world of folds. You'll see the same thing happening here. You just feel the harmony, the beautiful way these things hang together. You're thinking he's copying what he's got in front of him, but he's copying the beauty of what he's got in front of him. He's copying how the ways these things harmonize. That's actually his hunt here. Now, how is that different from music? So if you see this whole scheme here, you have, I believe this is probably some variation of green or something like that. And you have that world of greens, you have the world of reds, and you have yellow. So here's your classic sort of red, yellow, blue scheme. But look how they harmonize. Look how they beautifully hang together. How is that a different thing? It's not a different thing, is it? So Degas is aware that his friends know how to harmonize in color. And he's saying, I'm harmonizing in line. Nothing could be more common, more in line with what Ang is trying to say. This is just another wonderful example. And there's so many of these. I may come back to these as I think about the rest of what's the comments here. But here you can see Ang, the interplay. See, this thing up here is fascinating way, the interplay. If you just look at this thing as a whole, if you don't look at this thing as a whole, you'll miss some stuff. But there's so much, as I would call, even humor in these kinds of, when you get into the world of the stuff, the form, the shapes, and their interplay. It's amazing how fascinating these guys are. They're like orators in a sense who are always, you just sit there and you're spellbound by what they're doing with words. And so that would be what they're doing with the darks. This guy takes an area like this and just the design of this thing, the coordinating of the basic elements of this thing to make a fascinating and unified abstraction, with great timing between certain kinds of elements. I've talked to you before about what you see in Degas with a big sweeping thing like this, gradual, and then gradually going down like this, da, 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 da. You see that little ride he's creating there? That sort of thing, that's an underlying harmonious idea, right? But even the idea of this, and you back up mentally and you pick it up over here. That I'm just talking about the busies of the sort that it is. This is like a little bunch of clouds in his shirt, isn't it? So this kind of thing is a visual type, if you want to put it that way. And so it goes. And he plays the same games with form. You see the fullness of the cloud forms, and you get the same feeling out of the various forms. And so there's interplay of forms, and they're spatially regulated as well. They feel good in terms of where they are in relation to each other. That's it. That's what we're talking about. That's what Degas is. That's what Ingres is doing, right? So when he says he's a colorist in line, he's a harmonizer, right? And where you talk about a color scheme, you might be talking about Ingres might be talking about a form scheme or a line scheme or a pattern scheme, shape scheme. Pattern's a big, big word. That's a wonderful one to use. So if I could make you all musicians, you'd gain as painters. All is harmony in nature. A little too much, a little too little strays the scale and makes a false note. All is harmony in nature is an interesting thing, but for sure all is harmony in art, or it isn't art. One must succeed in singing with the pencil or the brush as well as with the voice. The rightness of forms is like the rightness of sound. A beautiful, beautiful, beautiful thought. And very coordinating of all the things we do. So you know why I referred sometimes to this work as music, and Degas in particular. Now, one of the things we know about with relation to Michelangelo is that he uses a word like counterpoint. Contrapunto, contrapposto. I don't know what those are in the dance and music world, but he talks about the way a line, say like this one here, may be picking up another line like this one here, and there's an essential this to thisness about it that gives it its music. So there's not a moment that Degas and Ingres aren't thinking the same thoughts in these kinds of ways. I grabbed this one on the right because it's just pure linear. It looks like a tracing. This looks like, you see the folds, like it looks like your tracing paper. And this was not uncommon for him to do this, and I think at some point somebody put a little glue on it and tacked it to a board. But what you're talking about is the interplay of this and this, or of all these things, these forms up here taken together and how they interplay with other forms down here. So this is actually the listening for the potential music, and that would apply as well to the abstractions of the second figure, right? And how that whole thing, how does that interplay? How does that whole operation here engage this one? This is one of those places where, again, you can refer to the Greek vases a little bit, as we've talked about before. So I'm just giving you some idea what might be meant, what this colorist in line thing is. So what is a colorist? Well, let's stick with Ingres for a few more minutes. I don't know if either of these is precisely true. This one I know. I don't know if that one's actually where this one is. I think that's in New York, and this is, I'm not sure I know. I think this was the Fog. I think this is one I grew up looking at, shall we say. Grew up as a painter looking at. But, so these are both Ingres, and you can see that he's totally into the harmony of color as well. These are both beautifully harmonized color schemes, right? So, colorist in line, I said colorist in line, but I mean harmonizer, coordinator of relationships. It's all he's talking about. And then the intrigue of how they do it is marvelous. So let's just talk about, before we talk about Degas, though, because a lot of people will say, well, Degas, but look at how these Ingres things are really, look how tight they are, how flat and simple the paint is, and how clean the outline is, and all those sorts of things. And we get to Degas, and that's not precisely the case. Let's take a quick look at this one. But this may be Degas responding to Ingres. A lot of crazy things have been written on the union of perfect color and perfect form. I've read this to you before. They will never be united, nor could they be united. Color, to be perfect, must have a contour that's floating and simple. It can never be arrested and never should you make stained glass putting in well-drawn figures. You'll lose the perfection of the lines that are already in the drawings. Then try to put it in order and inform the colors of a piece of opal. Well, at the very least, take in this part here. Color, to be perfect, must have a contour that's floating or simple. We don't precisely know what he means, but he's talking about the harmonizing of perfect color and perfect form, and you get the impression that when says form, he does mean outlines and modeling. So let's go to the Degas though and talk about how that works. And this should be a lot of fun. What we're looking at here, I just grabbed these because they're right on the top of the page. I grabbed them partly because of how crude they are in a certain way. Because I want you just to take a brief look at the left one and just talk about red play. See these darker reds that are browns, whatever, and they get down to these really hot versions that are orange. And the darkest one is this one. So you're seeing the interplay of the relationships. You see that the red, yellow, and blue that are being used there are somehow or other, that's his color scheme. There's this hunt for harmony in that way. But what a lot of people will miss in looking at these things is this. See the abstraction of this pattern? This is shape form stuff. And this is no different from what Degas is doing. Whether Degas could handle whether Ang could handle Degas' tendency to, well, in a funny way, shock the aesthetic, the world of taste, by the world of taste meaning, even the idealism of the Greek figure, that sort of thing. But look at and I'm talking about there's that idea of almost prettiness, right? Degas is saying it's not about prettiness, it's about harmony. And what he does, look what he creates, is a totally fascinating abstraction here out of this white pattern. Now that's a shape and form game there, a world of shape and form. But if you can get yourself back mentally, if you have a small phone, perfect. But you can see how fascinating, how he's allowed himself to explore the possibilities of making you an interesting set of, shall we say, arms, and interrelate them in a way that's just like completely musical, but not in one sense, pretty. Okay, so he's testing the limits of harmony. Would Degas agree with that? With his love of Raphael and the ancient Greeks? It's a good question. But we're talking about relatedness, right? So these things form, if you just stare at this hand for a minute, you'll be picking up these guys just like that. And I say if you look at this with the idea of the whole again, if you just stare at this hand, your brain inevitably takes in this whole thing and you begin to see the logic of it. The corollaries, the correspondences, words like that. And the same thing applies over on the right. Degas Ang is always talking about the simple forms and the great forms playing games to each other, and Degas certainly has that going. But you can even talk, if you wanted, I mentioned it before, that you are harmonizing the feet. Well, you could say, well, these are all hook shapes of a sort, right? These are all hook shapes. Well, not so much, but look at the distances between them, how that's varied. But never mind that as a little idea, just take it in as a whole. And you'll see there's an excellent game here between these guys. It's just fascinating, just that much. Or if you took the arms in just as a set, which for some reason this painting wants us to do. Or then if you took more than that, if you took the set of the arm leg, and arm leg in, you begin to see how you're having musical correlations between these things. Now, I know I'm shocking some of you. Maybe not so much. Even the patterning of the walls in the background with these curvy things is playing off of this stuff here. They're sort of the givens, of the costume in various ways. Do you see these things? So are these guys here reflecting that, and all these, whatever these guys are? So this is like a chaotic set, and this gets to be a more simple set, or this gets to be a more simple set. Anyway, in the meantime, it's a color scheme. That citrus kind of citrus. I don't know if he even gets it. It's that acidy kind of green that he likes, and he plays it right through into the orange. He just lets it play, and of course he provides for himself a place for these guys to play, and of course a connection for these guys as well. but it's a field of color and the interplay of color. In the same way, it's a field of forms, and the interplay of forms is the entire game. And the whole thing hangs together in a general way. I don't, by the way, know if this painting is whole here. I should probably not. I should have checked on that. But how would Degas, I mean, so here we are again, not this one, but this. It could make sense. If I could make you all musicians, you would gain as painters. All's harmony in nature. A little too much, a little too little strays the scale, makes a false note. One must succeed in singing with the pencil or the brush as well as with the voice. The rightness of forms is like the rightness of sound. That doesn't sound like a prettiness idea, does it? It sounds like a harmony idea. And that's what you're getting in Degas. And you get him harmonizing things that people don't think of. Now, you could say he's, even if you just said there's heads, he varies the heads and their tilt, and even that's interesting in itself. Or he gets a set of 3, and they'll be all different sizes, and they'll be all different gestures. And but these are form groups, if you want to call them that. You know, the darks form their own group. These middle reds that are middle dark form their own group, and you can see how he's designed them exactly the way you'd see an Ang designing that thing down the neck there. So, and so it goes, guys. I've been preaching this sermon for a while. But understand that when Ang is talking about nature, he's talking about, we notice things like this happening in nature. We look at something, we're fascinated by something, we don't know what it is. Now, the most simple version of it might be a flower that's very symmetrical. A columbine would be a wonderful example. You know, it opens up and it has these, you know, it has this opening, and there's 5 of them, and then it comes down and forms a little sort of curly point at the bottom. More of a solid form at the bottom. And the beauty of a laurel is just stunning, little symmetrical sort of, well, yeah. Trying to think of what a pentagram provides, but if symmetry is quite the right word. But you follow me, though, that there are these phenomena in nature that create the harmony within the flower itself. And this is just a human being taking and saying, can we get it a different way? How would God mind that? How would Ang mind that? And I apologize for all the times I've said Degas, and I should have said Ang. All right. So Ang says, here, you see in the model the relationships of the big things. That's where all the character is. Be keenly struck with it, and keenly too render these big things relative. Whoa. Oh, what's that, huh? If instead of following this method you grope, if you search on the paper, you'll do nothing that's of value. Well, of course, he's trying to get you to look and be struck with these pictorial elements. The big things, what are they? So they're form things, they're shape things, they're angle-related things, they're color things, they're chroma things, they're et cetera. It goes on like that, value units, like as in spotting. So follow that, and you have, inevitably, you're picking up a guy who's just doing that all the time. He's just doing it endlessly, relentlessly. This is the relational king. There isn't anything he puts into this game that Ang isn't talking about, right? I mean, whatever. So take this thing here, or take this thing here, which is so obnoxious, as it were, right? And this thing here is a strong angular gesture, very slightly irregular, but you can see it creates a strong angle. You see it picking up several other very long angular points. And that in itself is its own system and needs to be harmonized. And how does that relate to everything else? How does that ever get going? Well, it's got its own relationships through all the other things in this. This is a color scheme. Well, what's the color? So is this to this, even the heads, how do they play to this stuff? This pinky stuff out here that goes to the yellows. Are these variations on that? And are these dark versions of that? Of course. And so here we are doing that over and over and over again. We find the relatedness of this and this and this and this and this. What does he say? Let's read this again. You see in the model the relationships of the big things. What are big things, right? Well, they're things like blobs, so they're heads. We could just call them heads, but they're form blobs, right? They're light spots, or you might even say white spots. They're reds. They're angles, long angles. They're straight line sorts of things. Back of the chair, this stuff over here. All these things are the elements that make the music. And as I said, I think of Degas as a symphony director. He's like he wants every instrument you can even think of, and in his on the floor, right in the pit. So let's read that again. You see in the model the relationships of the big things. Now you could say Degas is just looking at a figure, but that Ang is just looking at a figure, but Ang is looking at. But he's talking bigger than that. And Degas says, what's true of the figure is true of the whole. And Ang already has shown us that by the interrelationships of the clouds, that the cloud forms with the shoulder, with et cetera, et cetera. You follow? So there's no mistaking that Degas is learning not just about what happens within a figure, but what happens within a rectangle, or with the chosen rectangle, especially once you've got it moving. So render these things relative to each other is what it could say. If instead of following this method now, you grope, you search on paper, you'll do nothing that's of value. So you first of all, you search out the relationships of the big things, and that's where all the character is. Be keenly struck with it, get it, understand it, and then play them to each other. Okay, that's all we're talking about here, and that's what Degas does to the nth degree. I'm not quite impressed with this reproduction. Sorry about that. Again, though, you'll see the well, let's talk about it in numbers of ways. In the Great Line, we didn't talk about in the other one much, but there's a certain line going through here, the sweep of the heads, this line here. There's a certain line sweeping through this whole thing. And there's also a different line. There's a different sweep going this way through here, right? You can see these things there. So there's lines in it and other lines and that sort of thing. You can see spots, light spots, right? These are all riding a particular line, the same line as this. Same line, actually, if you want to talk about the tree group, this upper part up here. So we're swinging this repetition. This is what we call a main line in a picture. This is one of the dominating lines of this picture. And then, of course, you see the interplay. Now, you could just talk about color harmonies in this. Look how beautifully these pinks are set off by the green world. Even if this is a poor reproduction, it's happened in every reproduction I've ever seen of this guy's work. It's interesting to see the gray of this guy's hair being part of this. Again, these photographs aren't reliable entirely, but that is the sort of thing that you're getting out of this as a Degas. You're getting this pink playing to the pinks. You're getting this gray playing to the blues, whatever it is, it looks like. And whatever else is left, if these are yellows, to whatever extent they're playing. They're playing to each other. They're harmonizing. There's the word we're looking for. You could even discuss about the fingers down here. What are they playing to, right? I probably don't have to get into too much of a thing with you to say, don't you see this? So there's these kinds of repetitions. Degas refers to those from time to time, by the way, and I wonder if he had music on his mind when he said it, but the idea of repeating like patterns, except he does variations within the repetitions. So the pinks here might not be the same as the pink by the time you get over to here, and so on. So there's variations, and and so it goes. Let's look at one last one. I think I'm going to look at your quotes just for a second again and make sure we haven't. The answer to Ken, the answer to yours, the colorist in line. If you say what color is trying to do is harmonize, it means go with. Then look how the lines are trying to go with, how the forms are trying to go with. But this is an example of, to me, what would be a perfect example of the combination of harmonized color and harmonized line and form. And it wouldn't matter what you looked at. I mean, these could be thought about as butts of horses in a certain way, formy sorts of things. But the color, you can't miss the color. The greens playing to green, playing all through, and these are all variations on green. The reds, obviously, very obviously, and you see the movement from one to the next, including a dark one in here, or other ones, but it's minimally on this, and you see them picking up again up here. And of course, you see the whites, and this is all music all the time. It's just music all the time. I think Ang would actually faint if he saw this, and I think he would faint with delight. So that's the answer to that question about though what I think he means. He's a colorist in line is that he harmonizes lines and nothing more. And that's all, according to his own words, that's all Degas, Ang is expecting of Degas. So to answer the, um, the first, the second Sahle's question, can you make a video that discusses if Ang would reject Degas' progression in art? It would be highly interesting. There's some suspense in that topic too because of their relationship. I'll tell you what their key relationship actually is. It's the concept of harmony being the thing, of unity with variety, and the idea of making music. The interplay of stuff to the point of being visually fascinating, just as surely as a piece of music must be. It has to be as harmonious, and then it has to have all these variations and treatments and whatever that are all somehow hanging together symphonically. I'm talking about music, but we're talking about Degas here. Can you see it? I'm hoping you can. I'm going to leave it at that for now. This is a discussion that I think ought to be on the lips of every single human being alive since Degas. And to me, it's a bit of a tragedy what happened since Degas in terms of his influence and people trying to turn the world upside down. Because I don't, it would be so nice if people in the world of modern abstraction would talk about harmonies and would talk the way Degas talks, I'm not, and the new realists of today, it'd be nice if they, instead of worrying about realism, they would be talking about this discussion. If they Degas discussion about harmony and relatedness and the interrelatedness of the whole and the music, boy, wouldn't that be a new place? Wouldn't that be a different place? So, guys, this has been fun. Thank you again, Jimmy C. and Ben C. For your nice contributions this week. All right, well, that was a half hour of fun. Maybe my favorite subject. All right, folks. Have a great painting weekend, and we'll see you next time.